He was the kind of billionaire CEO whose name alone commanded boardrooms and headlines. She was the ex-wife he thought he'd left behind. When he invited her to his post-wedding Thanksgiving, he expected tension, maybe a few polite smiles. But when she arrived, stepping out of a car valued at $500 million, the room froze. In that instant, the game had changed, and so had their story. The sprawling Maxwell estate sat atop a private hill, a fortress of glass, marble, and steel overlooking the glittering city below. Inside, the grand hall was alive with the sounds of clinking crystal, polite laughter, and the murmur of anticipation. Golden candelabras reflected light across the polished floors, and every surface gleamed with meticulous precision. A Thanksgiving feast had been prepared worthy of royalty. Smoked turkeys, exotic cheeses, desserts that glimmered like jewels, and wine collected from vineyards most people only read about. At the heart of it all stood Ethan Maxwell, billionaire CEO, a man whose name alone commanded power in boardrooms and headlines alike. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he moved with an air of effortless control, shaking hands, exchanging smiles, and delivering compliments that felt both sincere and strategic. Yet beneath the polished exterior, his mind churned. Today was not just about post-wedding celebration. It was about control, appearances, and ghosts from his past. A quiet voice in his ear reminded him of the guest he'd anticipated most, Victoria Lane, his ex-wife, the woman who had once been at his side through boardroom battles and private nights of passion, now a specter from a life he had closed the door on. He could picture her, poised, elegant, always knowing how to command attention without demanding it. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a rare flicker of unease crossing his otherwise composed features. Their divorce had been amicable on paper but tumultuous in reality. Headlines had whispered betrayal, ambition, and pride. Yet despite everything, a part of him wondered, what would she bring to this gathering? What did she want? Meanwhile, guests mingled unaware of the storm waiting to arrive. Socialites adjusted their gowns, business partners whispered strategies for networking, and staff moved like clockwork to ensure everything ran flawlessly. Ethan's new wife, Isabella, approached him, her smile soft but teasing. "You're thinking too much about her. Just enjoy tonight." Ethan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. Some things can't be ignored, and then, through the towering French doors of the estate, the driveway lights flickered, signaling the arrival of a guest whose presence would change the evening, and perhaps their lives forever. The evening before the post-wedding Thanksgiving, Ethan sat in his private study, the city lights glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air smelled faintly of aged leather and expensive bourbon, a reflection of a life meticulously curated. Isabella sat across from him, holding a crystal glass of champagne, her eyes reflecting amusement and mischief. "You should invite her," Isabella said casually, taking a sip. "Victoria, I mean." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Invite my ex-wife to a celebration of my marriage?" He almost laughed, but the thought quickly curdled into unease. "Why would I do that?" "Because, darling," Isabella replied, leaning forward slightly. "It's the right thing to do. It shows class, maturity, and a touch of humility. Besides, I think it would amuse everyone to see her face when she realizes who's really in charge now." Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered Victoria's smile, the one that had once disarmed him in boardrooms and bedrooms alike. That same smile had made him feel vulnerable, ambitious, and sometimes foolish. He wasn't sure if he wanted to witness it again. "You know she'll come," Isabella continued, her tone gentle but pointed. "And she'll bring her flair." Ethan stared at the invitation on the mahogany desk, perfectly embossed with gold lettering, Victoria Lane, post-wedding Thanksgiving celebration, Maxwell Estate. He sighed and ran a hand over his face. Pride warred with curiosity. A part of him knew he had changed since their divorce. The man who once needed to prove himself in every arena now understood that power came in subtlety, control, and timing. Yet the thought of seeing Victoria again sparked an unfamiliar tension in his chest. Meanwhile, Victoria sat in her high-rise apartment, framed by a skyline just as dazzling as Maxwell's estate. Her phone buzzed with the invitation and she smirked knowingly. "Ethan Maxwell," she murmured, her voice a mixture of nostalgia and amusement. "You think you can surprise me?" Her world had changed too. Once reliant on social connections and shared power, she now stood as a titan in her own right, commanding wealth, influence, and attention with effortless grace. The invitation was more than an obligation. It was an opportunity to remind the world, and Ethan, that she was not someone to be underestimated. Back at the estate, Ethan glanced at Isabella and nodded. "Fine, invite her." "Excellent," Isabella replied, her smile almost conspiratorial. "And get ready. She doesn't come quietly." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the cityscape. He had prepared a perfect evening, calculated every seating arrangement, every dish, every detail, yet he realized one variable was completely unpredictable: Victoria. The tension hung thick in the air, a silent promise that the following day would not be ordinary. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the sprawling Maxwell estate. The driveway, lined with polished marble and sculpted hedges, buzzed with activity as a parade of sleek cars, from luxury sedans to rare sports models, began arriving. Valets in crisp black uniforms glided between the vehicles, opening doors and assisting guests with practiced precision. Inside the mansion was a hive of controlled energy. The grand hall gleamed under the light of towering chandeliers, reflecting the meticulous attention to detail. Hand-embroidered napkins, gold-rimmed plates, and crystal goblets that caught every flicker of candlelight. Ethan, standing near the grand staircase, greeted his guests with the perfect mix of charm and authority. Business magnates shook his hand firmly, socialites exchanged polite smiles, and distant relatives nodded with restrained enthusiasm. Every interaction was a calculated display of poise, yet beneath it he felt a subtle tension building. Whispers traveled across the room like a current. "I hear Victoria Lane was invited," someone murmured to their companion. Another voice replied, "Can you imagine? After everything, she actually accepted." Ethan caught snippets of these conversations and allowed a faint smile to play across his lips. He had anticipated the attention, the curiosity, the speculation. After all, Victoria had always commanded it effortlessly. Meanwhile, staff moved with quiet precision, circulating trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But even their steady composure could not mask the anticipation that charged the air. Everyone, whether consciously or not, was waiting for the arrival of the woman who once shared a life, a name, and perhaps a world-changing influence with the billionaire CEO Isabella. Ever graceful, floated through the crowd, acknowledging guests and subtly directing their attention. She leaned in toward Ethan, whispering with a sly smile, "The look on their faces when she arrives, priceless." Ethan allowed himself a small laugh, though his mind remained on Victoria. Would she appear triumphant, vulnerable, or indifferent? Would she acknowledge him with warmth, challenge him with a gaze, or simply glide past as if he no longer existed? As the final rays of sunlight vanished behind the horizon, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted imperceptibly. Every conversation slowed, every smile became slightly more tense. The clinking of glasses seemed to pause mid-air. Then from the driveway, headlights appeared. Not ordinary cars, but something extraordinary. A vehicle so rare, so expensive, that even the most seasoned guests instinctively turned to look. The whispers started anew, louder this time. "Is that hers? No, that can't be. She's here." Ethan's pulse quickened, his carefully constructed composure tested for the first time that evening. He knew the night's equilibrium was about to be upended. The grand double doors swung open and the crowd collectively inhaled, sensing the arrival of someone who would redefine the room, the party, and perhaps the evening itself. The driveway lights reflected off polished chrome and glass as the most extraordinary vehicle anyone had ever seen slowly glided into view. It wasn't just a car. It was a statement, a $500 million hyper-luxury masterpiece, sleek and gleaming, its engine whispering power and wealth that most could only dream of. The crowd froze, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Even the valet stepped back, recognizing this was no ordinary arrival. Victoria Lane emerged from the car, every movement deliberate, graceful, and commanding. She wore a couture gown that shimmered under the estate lights, her presence amplified by the subtle gleam of diamond accents. Yet it was not just the outfit, the car, or the fortune that drew every eye. It was her aura, the unmistakable confidence of a woman who had conquered every room, every challenge, and every expectation without ever needing to prove herself. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is that Victoria? She's incredible. And she actually accepted the invitation? Ethan's pulse quickened. His jaw tightened slightly as he watched her glide toward the mansion, every step measured, every glance purposeful. He had prepared for this evening meticulously, yet in that moment he realized how unpredictable she could be. This was not the woman he had once known. This Victoria was untouchable, unstoppable, and utterly independent. The doors opened as she approached, and the guests instinctively parted. It was as if the entire room acknowledged that a force had entered, a living embodiment of wealth, elegance, and calculated power. Every eye followed her, every whisper paused mid-air, every conversation died in polite awe. Victoria's gaze met Ethan's across the hall. A subtle smile curved her lips, not mocking, not triumphant, but knowing. In that split second, she conveyed everything without saying a word. Recognition of history, awareness of power, and a hint of challenge. Ethan straightened, his confidence returning, though a spark of tension lingered. Isabella, sensing the shift in the room, gave him a knowing glance. The game had begun. Victoria continued her walk through the grand hall, exchanging polite nods with guests. But each gesture was deliberate, a reminder that she was no longer defined by anyone else, especially not by the man she once loved. Her entrance had achieved its effect. The room was silent and all eyes were on her. As she finally approached the center of the hall, Ethan's mind raced with questions. What was she really here for? Was it pride, curiosity, or a subtle reminder of the past? Could he still hold his ground in a world she now commanded as easily as he once had? And then, with all eyes fixed, Victoria turned her attention to him. A single measured nod, a faint smile, and the room understood. This was not just an arrival. It was a statement. The grand hall fell into a hushed anticipation. Guests discreetly stepped back, sensing that something far more compelling than luxury and wealth was unfolding before them. At the center of it all stood Ethan Maxwell, the billionaire CEO, perfectly composed, yet beneath the calm exterior, a storm brewed. Across the hall, Victoria Lane approached, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble, every step deliberate, radiating confidence and independence. When she reached him, the world seemed to narrow. No chandeliers, no guests, no opulent decorations, and just the two of them. Her eyes met his, sharp and knowing, carrying the weight of shared history. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm, measured, yet carrying a hint of amusement. "Victoria," he replied, keeping his tone neutral, though his pulse raced. "You decided to join us," she smiled faintly. "I wouldn't miss it, especially after all the fanfare." Her gaze swept over the astonished guests before returning to him. "And I hear you've made quite the impression tonight." Ethan allowed himself a small, wry smile. "We aim to please." The subtle tension between them was electric. Guests whispered behind champagne glasses and polished fingers, trying to interpret the dance of words and gestures. Was this a duel? A reconciliation? A game of power? Victoria's eyes softened slightly. "It's been a long time, Ethan. I've heard a lot, but I wanted to see for myself." "And?" he asked cautiously, hiding the flicker of curiosity that threatened to surface. She tilted her head, a playful smirk forming. "I see the same man I once knew, and yet so much has changed. I see power, wealth, but also control, restraint. I like it." Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the countless nights they had argued over boardroom strategies, over ambition, over dreams that now felt like relics. They had pushed each other to extremes, and yet here she stood, not as a rival, but as an equal in confidence and influence. Victoria continued, her voice softening with a hint of nostalgia. "I hope your new life makes you happy. Truly." He studied her carefully. The old fire, the brilliance, the independence, it was all still there, but tempered by time and experience. For a moment he wondered if the attraction he once felt had been less about love and more about challenge. "You look incredible," he said finally, genuine warmth in his tone, acknowledging not only her beauty but the empire she had built around herself. "And you," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips, "have built quite the spectacle here. Thanksgiving fit for kings." The room seemed to exhale as the tension dissipated, replaced by a quiet awe. Ethan and Victoria stood together, not in romance, not in rivalry, but in recognition of shared history, mutual respect. and the undeniable fact that they were both titans in their own right. The confrontation was not about rekindling love or asserting dominance. It was about acknowledgement. Two people who had once been entwined, now facing each other as equals with pride, poise, and dignity intact. Victoria gave a graceful nod and began moving through the crowd, leaving Ethan with a mind racing with memories and emotions he hadn't expected to confront tonight. And though neither said it aloud, both understood one truth. This Thanksgiving would be remembered, not for the feast, but for the moment when power, history, and pride collided in a single glance. As Victoria moved through the hall, it became immediately clear that her presence was not merely ceremonial. Every gesture, every nod, every word she spoke carried weight. She was no longer the woman who had once relied on Ethan's name to navigate high society. She was her own empire, confident, commanding, and utterly untouchable. Guests instinctively turned to her, some whispering in awe. "That's Victoria Lane. She built her company from scratch after the divorce," one murmured. Another added, "I've heard she's worth nearly $500 million now. Incredible." Victoria engaged with a few influential attendees, her conversation sharp yet graceful. She asked insightful questions, listened intently, and offered praise where deserved. The subtle brilliance of her presence was unmistakable. She could charm, impress, and dominate without ever raising her voice. Ethan observed her from across the room. He felt a mixture of awe, admiration, and a sting of nostalgia. Here was the woman who had once shared his ambitions and rivalries, now a living testament to independence. She had arrived not to challenge him publicly, but to remind the world and him that she had always been more than anyone imagined. Isabella noticed the quiet attention Victoria commanded and leaned close to Ethan. "See?" she whispered. "She doesn't need anyone to validate her. That's why she's unforgettable." Victoria's interactions were strategic yet subtle. She acknowledged Ethan with a polite, almost teasing glance each time she passed him, making it clear that she remembered their past, yet had moved beyond it. At the same time, she engaged with the guests, showcasing her accomplishments and social influence without seeming boastful. The room seemed to shift subtly under her presence. Guests began to reassess their perception of power, realizing that wealth and influence were not the only measures of dominance. Confidence, poise, and mastery of self were equally compelling. Ethan, who had once believed he was the ultimate authority in their shared world, now recognized a fundamental truth. Victoria had always been his equal. Her arrival, her manner, her presence, all of it conveyed that she needed no one to define her. And yet the most powerful moment came not in words or wealth, but in a simple, almost imperceptible gesture. As she moved past Ethan, she offered a calculated nod, a recognition of shared history, respect, and acknowledgement that they were two forces who had once intertwined and now stood as equals, titans in their own right. In that instant, every guest understood the unspoken truth. Victoria Lane was not merely an ex-wife, she was a power unto herself, elegant, commanding, and unforgettable. As the evening's chatter and laughter continued around them, there came a fleeting moment when the crowd thinned. Guests were drawn to the feast or mingling with influential acquaintances, leaving the grand hall quieter, a rare pause in the otherwise buzzing celebration. Victoria found herself beside the terrace windows, overlooking the twinkling city below. Ethan approached, careful not to appear intrusive, yet unable to resist the pull of shared history. The air between them was charged, a blend of nostalgia, pride, and unspoken curiosity. "Beautiful view," Ethan said, his tone casual, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. Victoria glanced at him, her sharp gaze softening. "It's fitting," she replied. "It reminds me that some things change, and yet some things remain." Ethan's chest tightened. Memories of their past life together, late nights negotiating deals, whispered arguments that ended in laughter, stolen moments in quiet corners, surged unexpectedly. He hadn't realized how deeply their shared history still lingered. "I have to admit," she continued, "when I received your invitation, I wasn't sure if I wanted to come. I didn't know if I wanted to face this." She gestured vaguely toward the hall, the glittering celebration, the world they had once moved through together. "And yet you came," Ethan said softly, a hint of admiration in his voice. Victoria allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Some things are worth witnessing in person. For a moment, neither spoke. They stood side by side, observing the crowd, the grandeur, the lives of those around them, yet acutely aware of the shared past that had brought them to this point. Ethan finally broke the silence. "I've changed," he admitted quietly. "Not just in wealth or status, but in perspective. I see now what mattered then, and what matters now." Victoria looked at him steadily, her eyes reflecting understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. "We both did," she said. "But some lessons can only be learned apart. I respect what you've built, and what you've become." There was a charged pause, heavy with all the words neither had spoken over the years. Regrets, pride, admiration, and a hint of lingering affection. Yet they were no longer the same people who had clashed and loved so intensely. They were equals now, standing on different paths yet acknowledging the other's journey. Ethan finally exhaled, a weight lifting. "You're incredible, Victoria. I see that now more clearly than ever. And you," she said gently, "have mastered more than just business or wealth. You've mastered yourself. That's why this moment works, for both of us." It was a quiet resolution, an emotional crescendo without spectacle. No one else in the hall would fully understand the significance of this private acknowledgement, but for them, it was monumental. Respect, understanding, and a subtle warmth had replaced tension, leaving a delicate balance of admiration and closure. As Victoria moved back toward the gathering, she cast Ethan one last look, a nod that spoke volumes. They had faced the past, recognized each other's growth, and silently understood that power, respect, and independence could coexist with past love and shared history. The emotional twist had been delivered, not through confrontation or drama, but through mutual recognition and quiet dignity, leaving both of them profoundly changed, and the guests oblivious to the depth of the connection they had just witnessed. The Thanksgiving feast continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. Victoria moved through the grand hall with effortless poise, engaging briefly with select guests, each interaction leaving subtle ripples of admiration and awe. She didn't dominate the evening, yet her presence had permanently altered the room's atmosphere. Ethan watched her from across the hall, seated near the head of the table, the weight of the night settling over him. He had expected tension, perhaps confrontation. Instead, he had witnessed a display of quiet power, confidence, and independence, a reminder of what he had lost and what they both had become. Victoria approached the edge of the terrace again, her entrance now complete, the 500-meter spectacle behind her, the crowd buzzing with admiration and speculation. She turned briefly toward Ethan, her eyes reflecting warmth, respect, and a hint of unspoken understanding. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. Ethan nodded, words failing him for once. He realized this Thanksgiving was not about displays of wealth, status, or power. It was about acknowledgement, closure, and growth. The woman he had once loved, fought with, and admired had returned not to challenge him, but to demonstrate that true strength lay in independence and self-mastery. Guests began to notice subtle signs of the evening's unspoken story. A quiet nod between two former lovers, a brief smile carrying more meaning than any conversation, a pause in the chatter that seemed to acknowledge something extraordinary. As Victoria departed, her car waiting, gleaming like a jewel, the mansion collectively held its breath. She waved subtly, leaving behind an air of elegance and authority that would linger long after the tires disappeared down the driveway. Ethan stepped onto the terrace, looking out at the city lights that mirrored the brilliance of the evening. Isabella joined him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Well?" she asked, a knowing smile on her lips. He exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and awe in his gaze. "Well, she's as formidable as ever. And I think tonight everyone, including me, finally understood that some people don't need anyone to define them." The wind carried the soft echo of the evening. Laughter, whispers of admiration, and the faint hum of an engine fading into the distance. Ethan turned back to the hall one last time, silently acknowledging the woman who had arrived in a storm of wealth and left a lesson in humility, grace, and strength. And in that moment he understood. Success, power, and wealth are nothing without respect, independence, and the ability to rise above past attachments. The post-wedding Thanksgiving ended not with drama, nor jealousy, but with a lasting impression of dignity, pride, and emotional closure, a story that would be remembered by everyone present, though most would never fully grasp the depth of what had just occurred.